Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking way past the romance and the Hollywood myths to do a real forensic breakdown of the specific engineering failures that doomed the Titanic. Most of us know the basic story, right? But when you actually look at the structural blueprints and the raw data, a much more fascinating and honestly terrifying picture emerges. We're going to examine the exact ship design and structural flaws that contributed to the sinking. We'll be focusing specifically on the bulkheads and the severe lifeboat capacity issues that turned a bad accident into an absolute catastrophe.
Now, to understand how things went so wrong, we really have to understand the era itself. The early 20th century, it was an age of sheer human hubris and fierce corporate competition. The White Star Line was in this heated battle for steamship supremacy against Cunard, a rival British firm that had just launched two incredibly fast, luxurious ships. So, in a rush to outdo them, White Star commissioned the Olympic-class liners. These were literally the largest man-made movable objects of their time. The confidence in these massive new ships was just sky high. It was a special issue of Shipbuilder magazine that famously deemed this new class of ships practically unsinkable. They really, truly believed they had conquered nature.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the fatal bulkhead flaw. Second, a severe lifeboat shortage. Third, the iceberg strikes. Fourth, the evacuation chaos. And finally, the cost of hubris.
All right, Section 1. The fatal bulkhead flaw, a critical design error.
So this is the first critical design oversight. And remarkably, it was hidden right inside what was heavily lauded as the ship's absolute state-of-the-art construction. To really grasp this, we need to understand what a watertight bulkhead actually is. The Titanic featured a double bottom and 15 of these watertight compartments. They were equipped with heavy electric doors that could be operated individually or literally all at once just by throwing a single switch on the bridge. This was the absolute pinnacle of safety technology at the time. This specific feature is exactly what gave the Titanic its famous unsinkable reputation. The idea was, if the ship took on water, they could just seal off the damaged sections, right? Well, not quite.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fatal flaw in that system. The individual bulkheads were indeed watertight, sure, but the walls separating these compartments only extended a few feet above the waterline. They didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. So when water filled the damaged compartments, the extreme weight caused the ship's bow to pitch forward. And because those walls were so short, the water simply poured over the top of one bulkhead right into the next and then into the next. It's exactly like water spilling over the dividers in an ice cube tray.
Moving on to Section 2, a severe lifeboat shortage, a secondary safety lapse.
That structural failure we just talked about perfectly sets the stage for a secondary oversight, and wow, the numbers here are truly alarming. The Titanic could carry up to 2,435 passengers, plus a crew of around 900. That brings the total capacity to more than 3,300 people on board. But there were only 1,178 lifeboat seats available. The ship carried a mere 16 standard lifeboats and 4 collapsibles. This terrifying ratio meant that even if they were loaded to absolute perfect capacity in an emergency, they could only accommodate roughly 1/3 of the ship's total population.
Now, what's truly staggering here is the contrast between common sense and the law at the time. Holding only 1/3 of your passengers is unthinkably inadequate by any modern standard, right? Yet Titanic's lifeboat supply actually exceeded the British Board of Trade's legal requirements. It's crazy, but it exposes a massive regulatory oversight. The maritime laws of the era were wildly outdated. They just hadn't caught up to the sheer size of these new Olympic-class megaships. So, they were perfectly legal and yet perfectly doomed.
Which brings us to Section 3, the iceberg strikes, a fatal collision.
This is the environmental catalyst that perfectly and tragically exploited the exact engineering flaws we've just been discussing. Let's walk through the timeline. On April 14th, it was a calm, moonless night. At about 11:30 p.m., a lookout spotted an iceberg dead ahead. The bridge reacted instantly. Engines were reversed, the ship was turned sharply, and they actually avoided a head-on collision. Instead, they seemed to just graze the side of the iceberg. The lookouts were actually relieved. But what they couldn't see was a jagged underwater spur of ice protruding beneath the surface. That spur slashed long gashes in the hull, completely compromising the ship below the waterline. Almost immediately, 5 of those bulkhead compartments began filling with seawater. And as we learned earlier, the bow began to pitch downward, starting that lethal spillover effect.
At this exact moment, Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief designer from Harland & Wolff, who was actually on board, toured the damaged area. Because he knew the blueprints so intimately, he knew those bulkhead walls were too short. He did a quick, grim calculation and informed the captain that the Titanic would remain afloat for perhaps an hour and a half. In an instant, the disaster shifted from a mechanical failure to a strict, terrifying mathematical countdown.
Section 4. Evacuation chaos. A haphazard rescue effort. With a 1.5-hour clock ticking down, human execution during the crisis made things exponentially worse. So the crucial point is 65. That is the number of people the very first standard lifeboat launched from the Titanic was specifically designed to hold.
But this staggering number, 28, is the actual number of people it left with. A little more than an hour after hitting the iceberg, the evacuation was deeply disorganized and haphazard. During the confusion of those precious hours, nearly every single lifeboat was launched woefully underfilled. There was a strict women and children first rule, but because of the totally disorderly procedures, many women and children couldn't even make it to the boats in the first place. On top of that, the crew feared the machinery lowering the boats would actually snap under full weight. So, struggling with crowd control, they ended up sending half-empty boats into the freezing Atlantic.
And finally, Section 5. The Cost of Hubris, a Mythic Tragedy.
Exceeding Thomas Andrews' grim prediction, the ship stubbornly stayed afloat for close to 3 hours, finally diving beneath the surface at 2:20 a.m. When the rescue ship Carpathia arrived the next morning, the horrific human cost was cemented. Out of more than 2,200 souls on board, only 706 survived. More than 1,500 people perished. Despite hundreds of individual acts of extraordinary bravery that night, spouses refusing to leave each other, individuals giving up their spots in lifeboats, the structural flaws and the complete lack of emergency capacity proved entirely insurmountable.
The sinking of the Titanic had an electrifying impact on the public. People literally could not believe it. Early newspaper reports even falsely claimed the ship was just being towed to port. Historian John Maxstone Graham brilliantly compares the Titanic story to the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. In both of these cases, the world reeled at the notion that the most sophisticated, cutting-edge inventions ever created by human hands could just explode or sink into oblivion. Both tragedies caused a sudden, massive collapse in public confidence, revealing that no matter how advanced our technology gets, we are still subject to human frailty and error.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We look back at 1912 and shake our heads at the idea of an unsinkable ship, but consider our modern world of artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, and deep space exploration. Does our belief in technological infallibility today still blind us to our own fatal flaws? It's absolutely a crucial question to ask as we continue to push the boundaries of engineering. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a clear understanding of exactly how and why the Titanic went down and what we can learn from it today.